Welcome everyone in Washington, in Berlin, and around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, guten Morgen, guten Tag. This is a session of our university seminar at George Washington University on Europe since COVID-19. This seminar is based at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. I want to thank Matt Cooley for handling all of the logistics for this important event. I am delighted and grateful to have Minister Tobias Lindner of the Green Party as our guest speaker today as State Minister in the Foreign Ministry. He has a doctorate in economics, and he's been a member of the German Parliament, the Bundestag, for the Greens since 2011. From 2017 to 2021, he was the security policy spokesperson for the party in the Bundestag. And with the new German government that was formed this past December, he became state minister in the German Foreign Office, one of 3 senior posts serving directly under Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock of the Greens. Since last December, Germany has been governed by a coalition of 3 parties: the Social Democratic Party under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the Greens with Annalena Baerbock as foreign minister, and the Free Democrats, the FDP, with Finance Minister Christian Lindner. Foreign Minister Baerbock and State Minister Lindner have both emphasized the importance of values-based policies centered on human rights, peace, freedom, democracy, sustainability, disarmament, and the rule of law. As we all know, Russia's war in Ukraine is a challenge to all of these. As the strongest power in the EU, Germany plays a critical role in EU policy toward the war. And needless to say, if Macron loses the runoff elections in France on Sunday, Germany will be even more important than it already is. Starting with a speech to the German Bundestag on February 27th, Chancellor Scholz announced an epochal change in German policies, a so-called Zeitenwende. The government ended the long-standing German policy of not sending weapons to war zones in order to help Ukraine. Germany has also drastically increased its defense expenditures. Scholz announced Germany would invest an additional 100 billion euros in the German military. He's backed far-reaching sanctions on Russia. And last week, the Chancellor pledged to devote 2 billion euros additional to help allies with arms, much of it going to Ukraine. Last week, 3 senior members of the Bundestag representing the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP visited Ukraine. They returned to Berlin calling for Chancellor Scholz to agree to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, to embargo Russian oil, and to support Ukraine becoming an EU member. And just yesterday, Zelensky filed some documents with that in mind, trying to join the EU. Germany gets 34% of its oil and 55% of its natural gas from Russia, and is engaged in intensive diplomacy to look for other suppliers and to ramp up other sources of energy. A public opinion survey shows that 48% of Germans are against a complete gas and oil embargo, while 42% support it, including a large majority in the Greens. Meanwhile, it is also important to note that Germany has taken in so far 340,000 Ukrainian refugees. In sum, Germany is intensively preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. And I dare say, Minister Lindner, you are extensively preoccupied with it and I am incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to speak to us today. After the minister speaks, I will follow up with some questions, and then we will open it up to questions from you all to be typed into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We especially welcome questions from our students, so please note if you are a student when you submit a question. With that, I am now happy to turn the screen over to Minister Lindner.
Thank you so much, Professor Harrison. Dear students of the George Washington University, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Berlin. It's a pleasure and an honor for me being here and having this discussion with you. As some of you might have seen in my CV, I was born in 1982. I don't know if I should consider myself being a Cold War child, but I spent my childhood days in Rhineland-Palatinate. That's a state in the southwest of Germany, right on the border with France and between the cities of Frankfurt and Strasbourg in France. As children, like many children worldwide, we used to play hide and seek in the forests. There were many good places to hide, I have to tell you. The best hideouts, however, these were the ruins of bunkers. These bunkers, they were remnants from the past wars between Germany and France. For us as children, they had lost their original meaning. They were just part of our games. I'm very grateful that the war itself was not a part of my reality growing up. Peace in Europe was rather taken for granted at that time. It was, however, not a matter, of course. The European Union and NATO were crucial cornerstones of a long, peaceful period in Europe I was fortunate to enjoy. And let me emphasize this, American soldiers, many stationed in my home state in Rhineland-Palatinate, especially, for example, at Ramstein, the largest US airbase in Europe, they personified the transatlantic security partnership guaranteeing this peace. However, many certainties of the past have been shattered on February the 24th by Russia's heinous attack against Ukraine. It marks the dawn of a new era. It's a watershed moment. And of course, it has, you have said it, a profound impact on Germany. Geographically, Berlin is closer to Lviv, the historic heart of Western Ukraine, than to Paris. The Brandenburg Gate here in Berlin is closer to Kiev's Maidan than to the Colosseum in Rome. We are witnessing a brutal war of aggression by Russia, a 10-hour drive from here in the heart of Europe. The terrible images of Bucha, Mariupol, and Kharkiv show Putin's utter lack of scruples. The Russian army is committing war crimes in many parts of Ukraine. The appalling injustice, the pain of the Ukrainian people, they affect us deeply, very deeply. Russia's aggressive attack has made clear once again that matters of war and peace, in matters of justice and injustice, no country, including Germany, can be neutral. Or to quote the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, he says, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor," unquote. Much has been written in recent weeks about our country's history and our German responsibility. I want to emphasize that yes, Germany's culpability of World War II and the Holocaust do indeed place upon us a special responsibility. But that is the responsibility to stand with those whose lives, whose freedom and whose rights are threatened. Professor Harrison, you asked me to speak about the question how Russia's war on Ukraine is impacting Germany and the Zeitenwende that Chancellor Scholz has spoken about. And I would like to highlight 5 aspects in particular. First, Germany supports Ukraine on an unprecedented scale. We have already allocated over 350 million euro for humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and its neighboring countries. We are delivering arms to Ukraine. For Germany, you said it, this was an unprecedented turn regarding long-standing policies not to deliver weapons into crisis regions. And as you may know, I'm a member of the Green Party, a party that has its roots in the peace movement. For us, this turn was a particularly significant step. But in the view of the suffering of the Ukrainian people caused by Russia's war of aggression, it was a necessary step. Germany ranks among the biggest military suppliers to Ukraine. We are delivering anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft missiles, personal protection equipment, and more. Chancellor Scholz underlined that everything that makes sense and that is effectively, quickly will be delivered to Ukraine. Russia must not win this war. Therefore, Germany will also try to match recent Ukrainian requests for heavy military systems like artillery, long-range air defense, coastal defense, and armored personnel carriers. And finally, the European Union continues to support Ukraine with military assistance too. We have allocated 1.5 billion euro for military expenditures aiding the Ukrainian war effort, and Germany pays a share of about 400 million out of this 1.5 billion. Second, we are making every effort to become independent of fossil energy imports from Russia as soon as possible. Please let me emphasize, this is not a 0-1 question. It's not an issue between having a complete embargo and doing nothing. This is more. Since February 24th, we have done everything to find new sources of fossil fuel imports as a short and midterm measure to offset Russian supplies. At the same time, we increased the targeted renewable power generation capacity by 2030, now at 80%, and ensured the increased government funding for the years ahead. We have made diligent plans to stop Russian energy imports as quickly as possible. That means we will stop Russian coal imports by August, in line with the rest of the entire European Union. Russian oil accounted for 35% of our oil imports prior to the war. We reduced it to 25% already, and we will continue to reduce it to 0 by the year end at the latest. Russian gas accounted, you already said it, for 55% as of our gas supplies before the war. Now we are at 40%. We are set to terminate all Russian gas deliveries during 2024, amongst others, by heavily ramping up LNG import capacity and respective network connections. And let me emphasize, we believe it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we have to influence, we have to hurt Russia, especially on the long term, and this will be an effective step. But we also support the European Commission in pushing for advancing the collective energy security vis-à-vis Russia. With the so-called Repower EU, the European Commission has tabled a proposal that seeks to reduce Europe's dependency by 2/3 within a year and entirely until 2024. Third, the European Union and the G7 under our presidency have put together an unprecedented and powerful set of sanctions against Russia. In close coordination with the US and other international partners, the European Union has adopted 5 substantial sanctions packages already that are visibly taking their toll on the Russian economy. And Germany has played an important role in ensuring unity, both within the European Union as well as in the G7. We are one of the drivers of sanctioning Russia. We have proposed crucial elements of the various packages. This included far-reaching restrictions on the financial sector, wide-ranging import and export restrictions, as well as several hundred designations of individuals and entities. These measures have considerably impact on the German and European economy. Germany is the largest economy in Europe, and we know that we have to shoulder a lot of the economic burden, and we are prepared to bear this burden. However, for the time being, we should aim to put in place measures that would hurt Putin's regime more than us. Meanwhile, the horrors of Russia's war on Ukraine continue unabated. We are continuously working on additional restrictive measures, as well as on ensuring successful implementation. The goal is to get Russia to stop its illegal war and to withdraw its troops. However, the Russian Federation must pay for its actions. Fourth, we are doubling down our own efforts to contribute effectively to security in Europe. So far, we have applied the so-called tripwire logic with regards to the defense of the 3 Baltic countries. This approach is not sufficient anymore. The entire eastern flank of NATO faces a new threat, and NATO will adopt its long-term force posture there accordingly. How exactly, this is something NATO will determine over the next months. But in the meantime, we are establishing new presences in the eastern and southeastern parts of Europe. Germany contributes significantly to the NATO presence in Lithuania and Slovakia. Russia's attack has also underlined that NATO's nuclear deterrence must remain credible. You know, I'm a member of the Green Party. My party fights for a nuclear-free world, but we, as I said, believe that the nuclear deterrence at that time must remain credible, and therefore, as a consequence, Germany has decided to purchase F-35 to ensure our nuclear participation going forward. In his historic speech in the Bundestag, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced the establishment of a so-called Sondervermögen, a special fund of 100 billion euro, specifically designed to strengthen Germany's security as well as our alliance and defense capacities, also as a NATO ally. We have begun the ambitious undertaking of modernizing and fully equipping our own armed forces. It's already clear that this will be a multi-year process, and the F-35s, they are one part of that package. Fifth, and finally, we are reassessing our understanding of what security actually means for us. The coalition agreement has set up that we will draft a national security strategy within 1 year for the first time in German history. That was decided even before the Russian attack against Ukraine. However, this war has a tremendous impact on that strategy. In this effort, we have started to reassess our own understanding of security. And in our view, it consists of 3 crucial elements that cannot be separated from one another. First, security means invulnerability of our own lives, protection from war and violence, from acute specific threats. Second, security means protecting the freedom of our lives. This includes aspects we may never really have thought about before. We are seeing this now in Ukraine, in the courage of the men and women defending their country. In their resolve, we see what these people are defending with their own lives, democracy and the right to decide their own path and to live in freedom. And third, the security for the fundamental necessities of our lives. Security does not exist where war obliterates livelihoods, as well as we are seeing now in terrible scenes in cities under siege. Nor does the basis for a secure life exist, and we know this, we can see it worldwide, where the effects of climate change, where hunger, poverty, and the lack of prosperity force people into conflict and suffering. These last aspects brings us to another crucial security issue of our time that I want to mention, the climate crisis. This is not a competition between several crises and the challenge of war and peace. It's not a climate crisis, it's not a crisis for the better times when you do not have big challenges. Protecting the climate is an issue of our own security, as we know in these days, as I already said on the dependence on, for instance, fossil fuels from Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, we have so far concentrated on the shifts in policy that Russia's attack on Ukraine has brought about. However, it is important to recognize that not everything is suddenly new and different. I believe in particular that our greatest strength in these days is our unity. When Mr. Putin, if Mr. Putin was surprised by several things, then it was the will of resistance of the Ukrainian people and the speed and the strength of the reactions of the Western countries united together in the G7, in the European Union, and in NATO. We are giving a resolute response to Putin's war together with our allies, partners, and fellow liberal democracies. We are partners who share the same values and who stand by them together. If we want to prove that the idea of democracy is stronger than any authoritarian regime, then we must translate our principles in even more effectively into practical policy. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I'm looking forward to your questions and hopefully to a lively debate.
Thank you so much, Minister Lindner. It's wonderful to have you with us and hear such an important and wide-ranging statement about what the German government has done and what we're looking toward in the future. I'm glad you talked directly about the fact that Germany can't wean itself from Russian oil and gas overnight. A lot of people want this and think it could be done right away, but of course it can't. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the planning for, I know that economics minister has been traveling to other countries to look for new supplies of oil and gas, and that there are talks about building LNG terminals. What are the options that Germany is exploring so that in the sort of short to medium term, Germany can look elsewhere, but then in the longer term, as you said, try to become independent from these fossil fuels?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. As you said, it's especially the gas supply is something that is highly dependent on the pipeline structure. If we would shut off the gas supply from Russia by now, that would hurt our economy very deeply, especially the chemical economy. We have some factories in my home state that are melting glass, for instance. If you shut these factories down, they get damaged. You cannot pull them back in a few months. And as I said, we believe, our assessment is this is unfortunately a marathon, not a sprint. Every sanction we impose, every measure we take needs to be sustainable on the long run. That means almost for years, not only for a few weeks. And if we would have an embargo, a complete embargo on gas right now, with a very, very high probability, we would have to take it back by the next winter. So that would be a victory for Mr. Putin. That would be a sign, oh, Mr. Putin can impose pressure for us. So our strategy is to reduce the gas supply as fast as we can, step by step, as fast as we can, but in a sustainable way. Therefore, we are improving the pipeline infrastructure. You know, gas supply is dependent on that infrastructure. We have agreed, and as you said, I'm from the Green Party. A few months ago, a year ago, we would have been opposed to LNG imports by ships, for instance. Now we are willing, we are supporting it, we are putting it forward to have LNG terminals in our harbors, to have LNG mobile terminals on ships in the Northern and Baltic Sea, to diversify our supplier structure so that we never in the future anymore get so much dependent of one country as we now are dependent of Russia. That was a big mistake in history to be that dependent as we are in terms of gas. And on the midterm and on the long run, it's important to substitute gas by renewables, by green hydrogen, for instance. So on the long run, our aim is to get completely independent of any fossil fuels.
Thank you. My next question is about policy toward Russia, both at the governmental level and that of regular citizens. When Annalena Baerbock campaigned for the chancellery, and since she has been foreign minister, she has emphasized a human rights-based foreign policy and was very critical of Russia even before the war. The SPD, on the other hand, has had a long-standing policy since Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik in 1969 of making every possible effort to build bridges with Russia. Recently, of course, the SPD, including Chancellor Scholz and President Steinmeier, have come in for some very strong domestic and international criticism, including from Ukrainian President Zelensky. While most parties in Germany want to help Ukraine, there are differing views on how strongly to counter Russia, including with an embargo of oil and gas. German public opinion polls, even from last week, show an ongoing divide between former Eastern Germans and Western Germans on policy toward Russia, with East Germans less willing to give up the ties. Moreover, from these recent opinion surveys, 53% of the people in the former East do not want to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, while 61% of former West Germans do want to send heavy weapons. So if you could talk about these differences at the government level and that of regular citizens in looking at Russia and not just helping Ukraine, but Russia.
Yeah, that's a very complex question, and I'm trying to give some answers. First of all, concerning the issue of heavy weapons, there's one very famous quote that a clever government, an intelligent government, should not only look at the opinion polls or do what the opinion polls or the majority of opinion polls say. They should try to act and to convince the people. So not follow the polls, get the polls following you. That would be my point. And as my minister said at the foreign ministers meeting of the European Union last week, the pictures we have seen from Bucha, the pictures we have seen from other cities, the war crimes committed by the Russian army. If you see all this, you need to send more heavy systems if those systems are available and if these systems help. For sure, there are some conditions that need to be fulfilled. You need to have spare parts, you need to have ammunition, you need to have training. But in general, it makes sense to send those heavier systems. And regarding the polls, and that's the second thing I want to clarify, I personally, but also the German government, we don't have anything against the Russians, against the ordinary Russian people. We have serious problems with their regime, with their president, with the oligarchs backing the power of Mr. Putin, but not with the ordinary Russians. And as you said, there is still a lively civil society in Russia. There are journalists, there are artists that live in resistance to Mr. Putin, that pursue a Western way of life, and we need to keep those ties. The problem or the challenge is, you talked about bridges. You can only build bridges if both sides are willing to walk over such a bridge. And I would say for a very long time, the former German governments, they tried to build bridges to Russia, ignoring that the Russians don't want to, especially the Russian officials, the government don't want to walk over that bridge. That's the point. It only makes sense if there is some progress. So what we need is a dual track approach. On the one hand, trying to help to support those in the civil society of Russia that want to live in a free and liberal way. You have to talk about visa, for instance. You have to talk about networks, other things, so that opposition in Russia can speak out their opinion. On the other hand, and it's also very clear, there is no business as usual with the Russian government. We are trying to isolate them on the international level as good and as strong as we can. And if you look at the two resolutions decided by the General Assembly of the United Nations and of the countries, of the number of countries that have supported those resolutions, that's a very strong signal. And my government is reaching out to all of our like-minded partners, to all countries worldwide, in supporting, condemning Russia's behavior and trying to isolate the government of Mr. Putin as good as we can.
Thank you. All right, we have now reached 9:30, and I'm gonna move to some questions that have come into the chat. So we are, since we're a university, I'm gonna pick the one about academic exchange programs first. One of our viewers asks, what do you think about continuing, for example, DAD, exchange programs with Russia? Should they go on right now or not?
To give you an honest answer, so, you know, I'm an economist by training. My answer would be it depends, or I don't know, and on what issues does it depend. So the problem is that in Russia, as in Germany, most of the universities are public universities. They are state-owned. They are owned by the government. And for our government, the challenge is that we said we don't want to have any cooperation with the Russian state, but with the civil society. So you have to look into the details. How much interlinked are they? Is it a university that is very, very close, for instance, to the Russian armed forces? Or is it just a university or a faculty that is under a public law, that is a public institute, but not influenced by the government? That's on what it depends. And then you have several options. You can continue a program, you can stop a program, or you can freeze a program. And I am very much in favor to really look into the details on the existing cooperations and to make case-by-case decisions.
Thank you. So many students and others are all asking a similar question having to do with nuclear power. Why Germany got out of nuclear power, what is the future of nuclear power in Germany? Has this war made Germany rethink halting the production of nuclear energy?
Thank you very much for that question. And the short answer would be there is no future for nuclear power in Germany. That would be the answer to the question, what's the future? And the answer is there is no future. But to go more into detail, we have decided in a big consensus in Germany in 2011 to phase out all nuclear power plants by the end of this year. Only 3 reactors are remaining. And the Ministry of the Environment has investigated the question, okay, is there really a feasible option to extend the use of these remaining 3 reactors, and would it help? And the answer is there is no feasible option. And that's for 2 reasons. The first reason is you would have to do in that case more investments and modifications of the reactors for security reasons. But the more important reason is the uranium to be used in that reactors also comes from Russia. So if we would extend or continue the use of the nuclear power plants, we would change the one dependency in terms of gas to another dependency in terms of uranium. And we don't think that that's a clever answer. The answer is to reduce the dependency in terms of all fossil fuels towards Russia step by step until 0 in the year 2024.
Thank you. Another question that several of our students and others have asked has to do with the Ukrainian refugees and the 2015 refugee crisis, and whether Germany learned some things from the earlier influx of refugees that are helping Germany to accept and house and integrate Ukrainian refugees now.
So yeah, I believe we have learned a lot, and there are many lessons learned from 2015. The biggest lesson might be that Ukrainian refugees who are entering Germany have full access to the labor market from now on, immediately. That's the big difference to 2015. So who comes to Germany and wants to work is free to work and has the permission to work. That's the huge difference. And we have taken many steps to reduce bureaucracy in having these refugees registered, in having given them access to social aid and for immediate needs. So there are many lessons learned. But let me also emphasize, there are also lessons learned in the whole European Union and our Eastern European allies, Poland, Slovakia, but also Moldova. They are doing a great job and they deserve our support wherever we can support them. You know, the refugees are coming over the border to those countries, and we are trying to give support in logistics, for instance. My minister, Annalena Baerbock, she has hosted a Moldova support conference here in the Foreign Office in Berlin, because if you look at the refugees per capita, so compared to the population, Moldova is under high pressure. And we believe that we need to support that country, because otherwise it could fall under Russian influence, even without using any military power. So one important part of the story is really to give support to our Eastern European allies. And let me mention one last aspect that's also different to 2015. Yes, there are many refugees coming to countries like Germany, but many already said, we don't want to emigrate to Germany for our whole life. We want to rebuild our country. We left Ukraine because it's too dangerous there, but we want to return and we want to rebuild a free, liberal Western Ukraine as soon as we can. And that's also a difference compared to the situation 2015. And therefore, it's also our obligation that Russia must not win this war, and that there's a chance for the Ukrainian people to rebuild their country and to be a part of the Western liberal free world.
Thank you. There's a question about common European foreign policy and wondering about the impact of Russia's war on Ukraine. Has that helped bring the EU together in forming a more common foreign and security policy, or not necessarily?
I think it helped, and it had proven that the European Union is working. I believe 1 year ago, there would have been many articles about the dysfunctionality of the European Union. You know, that most of the decisions had to be taken unanimously in the European Union. But the system has shown, especially since it's under pressure by the Russian war of aggression, that it works, and that the European nations stand together in terms of sanctions. And let me emphasize, sanctions are also foreign and security policy. What we do by sanctioning is another way of deterring Russia. And it was a tough job also by my government to get the sanctions of the United States, of Canada, of the UK in one line with the sanctions package of the European Union. You know, there are different legal frameworks. It's not taken for granted in 1 or 2 days that you have the sanctions packages on the same level. So it shows that the European Union is working, and I believe that in many European countries, it's well understood that also the European Union, not only NATO, is a guarantee for a life in peace and in freedom, and this is also shown that many European countries, not only Germany, have additional funding for their armed forces and are willing to fulfill the 2% pledge by NATO.
Thank you. We have two questions from students going in the same direction about fear of Russian cyber attacks. There is much talk in the United States, almost daily in the news, of fears of ways Russia could hack into important US systems, including pipelines, as they have done before. So the question is, do similar concerns exist in Germany? Has there been discussion of this, and how does Germany plan to deal with these concerns?
So yes, there are concerns, but no, there is no fear, to say it this way. We are well aware that Russian authorities and hacker groups close to the Russian government are investigating, have ideas, have plans to do cyber attacks on high-value targets in the whole European Union. We are watching and investigating that situation very carefully with our own intel, with the intel of our partners, and we are trying to do what we can, everything what we can, to protect our own cyber infrastructure. So I'm not allowed to tell any details, but to give you some idea. So if you have any insights or any incidents and information that there might be a cyber attack, let's say on a pipeline or on a company or on electricity, then we are informing the company. We are trying to do in advance to do what we can to protect the systems, and also to make clear in the public that we are watching Russia very carefully in that term.
Yes, as are we. I see many questions coming in from students. This is just so exciting. I want to encourage others, you can submit a question if you're not a student. But the latest question from a student has to do with how long this war is likely to last. People hoped that this wouldn't happen and that it would be very limited. And of course, all of that just keeps changing, and their discussions are moving into thinking, wow, this really could go on for quite a while. So the student asks, are there discussions in Germany about the possibility of a long drawn out war in Ukraine? And if Germany's obligations would change in a conflict that lasts multiple years and not months. In addition, has the German government begun thinking about what its obligations will be to rebuild Ukraine, to help rebuild Ukraine when the war finally ends?
Many difficult questions, and let me start by saying when the war started on February the 24th, I believe many journalists, also in our own countries, believed, oh, this war might only last for a few days and then Russia might win, and so on. We all know this narrative. And what we can see, and what was one of the miscalculations of Mr. Putin, is that not only the Ukrainian government, but also the whole people of Ukraine, they show a will of resistance. They don't want to live in a second Belarus. They don't want to be governed by Russia. Let me add one thing. I personally do believe that the possible NATO membership of Ukraine was not the main issue for Mr. Putin. The problem for Mr. Putin was and still is that there is a country next to Russia where Russian people could see that people are living with more freedom, with more wealth, in a Western liberal way, and that threatens Putin's power base, that threatens Putin's regime. That's his problem. And that's why he attacks. That's one of the reasons why he attacks Ukraine. How long will it last? Honestly, I don't know. As I have seen, the people of Ukraine are willing to resist. Putin might have maybe a military win in some areas of Ukraine, but he is not able to convince the mind and the heart of the people living in Ukraine. And therefore, he is not able to have a victory. Is Germany anticipating its obligations in the future? We are well aware of the fact that also our own security and our own welfare is also dependent on the future of Ukraine. And if this war ends, for sure we are willing to assist the Ukrainian people in rebuilding their country. We are also willing to assist the Ukrainians in protecting their country. And our aim is to contain Mr. Putin, to stop him, to prevent him from attacking another country. Because let me say this war might end one day, but as far as I can see, Putin might be still in power. And it might take a long time for Russia after Putin coming. And so therefore we are still left with the problem of Mr. Putin. And that means that we have to contain Mr. Putin. That also means that we cannot lift sanctions if Russia is not changing its course. And as long as Mr. Putin is publishing articles where he is denying the whole statehood of nations like the Ukrainians, we have a problem, regardless if there is a war in Ukraine or not.
Thank you for that passionate statement. You are so right. That's all I can say. Yes, we have so many questions coming in. So one question about the new LNG terminals. So the question is, how can you economically justify investing billions of euros in new LNG terminals when Germany also wants to achieve net zero emissions in the medium term?
Honestly, that's not the ideal textbook solution, for sure. For sure, if we would have enough time, if there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine, if Mr. Putin would be a credible Western politician, I wouldn't invest any euro or dollar in an LNG terminal. I would try to pursue net zero as soon as we can. But now we have conflicting goals, and we have learned, we have seen that the dependency on Russian fossil fuels is on the short and on the midterm a big issue, and we have to reduce the dependency as soon as we can. What we are trying to do when we are investing in LNG terminals or in new pipeline infrastructure, we are trying to build it in a way that it can be used later on for green hydrogen. So our idea is, when we are investing in new infrastructure that might be used for LNG or for other gas on the medium and short term, that it's also feasible for using green hydrogen in the future, because we believe that's the future if you want to pursue net zero.
Thank you. Another question has to do with Russian information warfare. How has the war, or is the war, influencing the German public by using disinformation campaigns from Russia and others across social media platforms? How is the German government pushing back against Russian information warfare?
For sure, that's an issue for all Western societies, and I'm very grateful that many of the providers for social platforms, like we all know these, that they have shown responsibility and are trying at least to mark and to isolate misinformation. In Germany, we had a special issue with a so-called TV program called Russia Today Germany. That was a German language Russian propaganda TV channel. They didn't have any license that allowed them to provide a program. They even didn't apply for any license. That's the point. The Russians are accusing us in having censored them. That's not true. They have acted against the law, and they haven't been denied a license. They didn't even apply for anything. So we have shut this TV channel down. So on the one hand, it's about sticking to the law and applying the law, especially to propaganda and to misinformation. But on the other hand, I'm strongly convinced that we as Western democracies have to do more. We have to have our own assessment of the situation in social media. So what we are doing, for instance, in the German government, is having a daily assessment about the Russian narratives, especially in social media and the Russian media. What are they telling? What are the narratives? You know it better in the US than we do, the accusations of chemical laboratories funded by the US in Ukraine and all this false flag information. And the other thing is, we have to be more courageous about telling our own narrative. It's not state propaganda if you, as a government, trying to convince and to explain to your public and to your population what you are doing and why you are doing this. It's not propaganda if you explain to the public that, for instance, Russia has agreed on the sovereign decision of the Ukrainian people in the NATO-Russia Founding Act, for instance, in 1997, that it's the independent decision of Ukraine if they want to become a member of NATO or not. That's not propaganda to explain the facts. And I believe for sometimes too often, we as governments have taken those facts for granted. We have estimated or thought that everyone knows everything, and that's not true. And so it's a continuous effort to explain the facts and to explain that defending the international rules-based order means also defending documents like the UN Charter, where the Russian signature is below it. It's not rules imposed by the West over the Russians. These are our common rules, and we have to defend them.
Yes, indeed. So there is a question you will not be surprised to know about Gerhard Schroeder, Nord Stream 2, etc. But the question is, how has that been viewed? In what way was his involvement acceptable to the Federal Republic of Germany? How do people see the role that Schroeder has played in signing these important deals with Russia, Putin's Russia?
You know, that's a challenge to ask a government official about a former German chancellor. But and I'm not a career diplomat, but I'm trying to give an honest but also diplomatic answer to that question. Many former German presidents and chancellors, when they retire, they know that they are still, like in the United States, are representing the country by what they are doing, by what they are not doing, by their behavior. They are even giving sometimes advice to the government or representing the government, for example, in state funerals. And that's my personal opinion. I do very much regret what Schroeder did in becoming member of the supervisory board of Gazprom. That's not illegal. But my very personal opinion about that is it's a pity, and it's also damaging the reputation of the office of being federal chancellor. And if you look again at the opinion polls in Germany, I believe that many Germans have the impression that Gerhard Schröder cares mostly about his own banking account and about the salaries he receives for taking that mandates in the Russian companies. And I do very much regret that Mr. Schröder till today is not able to step back from these mandates and these jobs and to take in the public a clear position that also he had a misview of the mind and the ideas of Mr. Putin. That's a pity for sure, but let me make clear, Mr. Schröder is not part of the German government. He retired as federal chancellor in 2005. So his opinions and his statements are not the opinion of the German federal government.
Thank you. So one final question. Germany is in a particularly difficult situation because of its World War II past and the Holocaust. And I would assume that every time Germany weighs this question of sending weapons and now this push to send tanks, you know, the World War II hangs in the background. Yes, Ukraine needs things now, but, you know, pictures, you know, this Nazi narrative, this false Nazi narrative that Putin constantly gives about the Nazis in Ukraine, you know, having German tanks there would just play into that. So I'd be curious about your response to the weight of the World War II past on German behavior now.
You know, the big lesson learned from World War II, in my opinion, is the UN Charter, the Charter of the United Nations. And I believe Germany bears a special responsibility for upholding the principles of this charter. And Ukraine is under attack. And so it has the right by Article 51 of the UN Charter to defend itself. And so Germany and other countries have the right to support Ukraine by delivering weapons. That's the point. That's the thing we need to explain. And that includes many, many military systems. And as I said, if armored vehicles are available, then there will be ways to deliver them to Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Germany's very lucky to have someone so knowledgeable and passionate as you, speaking for the government and speaking on behalf of all of us here at George Washington University. Thank you. We also want to thank CNN for recording this as we have recorded. I also want to announce that the final session of this seminar will take place on Wednesday, May 11th from 10 to 11:30 East Coast time. That's 4 to 5:30 p.m. Central European time. We will look at the impact of the war on energy security in Europe. We'll be joined by Julian Vettangle from the Clean Energy Wire in Berlin, Peter Rashish from the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies, and Samantha Gross from Brookings. Matt Cooley will put in the chat how to sign up. It's there, how to sign up for our mailing list, so you will be invited to that next event. But for now, Minister Lindner, we thank you and we wish you all the best as you continue your incredibly important work.
Thank you so much for the discussion, for listening, and I hope to see you soon, maybe virtual or in person. Bye-bye from Berlin.
Goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen. Alles Gute.
Auf Wiedersehen.